House Democrats hope the drama of these impeachment hearings will draw viewers and change minds across the aisle. But so far, there's no sign of daylight between President Trump and House Republicans. Joining us now, Congressman Jim Hines, the #2 Democrat on the House Intel Committee. Congressman, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Chris.
Let's start with the testimony from the three witnesses that the Democrats have called so far in this hearing. Here is a back and forth between Congressman Jim Jordan, a Republican, and Ambassador Bill Taylor.
You didn't listen on President Trump's call and President Zelensky's call?
I did not.
You've never talked with Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
I never did.
You never met the president?
That's correct.
You had 3 meetings again with Zelensky and it didn't come up.
And 2 of those they had never heard about, as far as I know.
And
there was no reason for it.
President Zelensky never made an announcement. This is what I can't believe, and you're their star witness.
Isn't it the case, Congressman, that none of the witnesses that you've had on the stand so far in public has any firsthand evidence of what President Trump said?
That is the case, Chris, and of course that changes this week. The 3 witnesses that you saw in public this week, of course, were important because they could give context to what has occurred. And you summarized it in talking to my friend Mr. Scalise. It was characterized as crazy to withhold military aid, which did happen, despite what Mr. Scalise said. And of course we heard from Ambassador Yovanovitch, who did have firsthand experience of waking up at 1 in the morning to be told that she had to get on the next plane because, as we learned, she was in the way of the president's intent to get the Ukrainians to investigate. But none of them
ever had any direct contact with the president, which brings us to Gordon Sondland. Doesn't your case essentially depend on Sondland, who's the only witness that you're going to put up in these public hearings who met with the president? Yes, he did meet with him a number of times, but if he doesn't say that the president set this condition, this quid pro quo, doesn't that blow a hole in your case?
Well, you know, I don't think it blows a hole in the case. And why do I say that? There is now ample evidence out there, you know, that there was a corrupt deal being cooked up. For example, the statement by the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, that he didn't want any part of this, as he called it, drug deal that was being cooked up. But we will hear from at least 2 firsthand witnesses, right? Ambassador Sondland, as you talked about, we know what he's already said in his revised testimony when he refreshed his recollection. He basically said, yeah, that's what was happening. We'll hear from Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. And Chris, here's an important point, too. You know, the president, who frequently says, I'm the most transparent guy out there, is refusing to permit other people, like his chief of staff, who presumably had conversations with him about this, to come testify. He is refusing to permit emails and phone calls and other documents that might actually shed some light on this to come forward. And the American people need to ask themselves a question, which is, given the outlines that have been developed and that will be developed by firsthand testimony next week, is refusing to allow others to testify and to produce documents, is that the behavior of an innocent person or somebody who's concerned about what those facts might look like?
But as far as Vindman is concerned, he overheard the phone call, so did other people, but he didn't have any firsthand exposure to the president. First of all, how confident are you that Gordon Sondland is going to say in his half-dozen meetings with the president over the course of the summer, he set a clear condition, no aid until they investigated the Bidens? Are you sure he's going to say that?
Well, no. I mean, again, I'm not going to try to prejudge what a witness might say on the stand. Look, you know, lots of crimes can be committed, and this is typical in corrupt enterprises, by the boss hinting and giving direction and everything. You know, corrupt people don't always say, hey, here's the signed contract. What has already developed from secondhand witnesses is that this aid was withheld as a condition. And, you know, Steve Scalise may try to convince the American public that the president was just ticking the legal box, that there wasn't corruption. That's just not true. The Department of Defense, not the president, certifies whether Ukraine is corrupt or not, and they had certified certified before the aid was withheld. So what we're seeing is a whole bunch of defenses that just don't make sense.
Well, I mean, forgive me, sir. I mean, I don't know that Richard Nixon, the impeachment investigation, he was never, of course, formally impeached. He resigned first, would have been nearly as powerful without John Dean. I'm not sure the Clinton impeachment would have been nearly as powerful without the blue dress. If you don't have anybody who can take us into the Oval Office, it seems to me that creates a big problem. And the other question I have is, how credible is Gordon Sondland at this point? He already had to revise his testimony once to tell you about a meeting that he never discussed, only after other witnesses cornered him on it. And this July 26th phone call in a restaurant with him and the president saying he's going to do the investigation, he never even mentioned that to you. So is he even a credible witness?
Well, that's a good question, and again, we do have people who were in the room. Chief amongst them, Ambassador Sondland. We will say, I'm not going to try to prejudge his testimony, but he has amended his testimony. Look, it was not lost on Ambassador Sondland what happened to the president's close associate Roger Stone for lying to Congress, to Michael Cohen for lying to Congress. My guess is that Ambassador Sondland is going to do his level best to tell the truth, because otherwise he may have a very unpleasant legal future in front of him. But look, the other thing I would emphasize, Chris, is there are plenty of other people who were in the room. Mick Mulvaney, the chief of staff, refuses to come before Congress. John Bolton refusing
I understand,
to come
but you're not going to get
Congress.
that. Well, I mean, you're not going to get the testimony of Bolton because you're not willing to wait for it.
Well, again, there are people and there are documents and there are emails. And all I'm saying to you is that we are going to have first-person witnesses who were in the room this week. And the American people should scratch their head over why the president is refusing to let anybody else, like Mick Mulvaney, come forward to the Congress to tell their story or even to release documents and emails. That is not the behavior of an innocent person.
I got a couple of questions for you. We can wrap this up. Last week on Meet the Press, you said, you know, I don't think that this Latin quid pro quo is such a good idea. It's hard for people to understand. The Washington Post has subsequently reported that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee had actually done focus groups and found out that people didn't like quid pro quo. They were more impressed by bribery. Is that why you guys all changed your language, because of a focus group?
No, I don't think so. Look, what we have here is we have an abuse of power. And an abuse of power is when you use your power for corrupt ends. Example. Yes, the president has the right to fire an ambassador, but the president does not have the right to fire an ambassador because she's standing in the way of a corrupt enterprise, okay? That's an abuse of power. What is challenging, of course, is explaining precisely whether this is bribery. That is, do I offer you something to do something corrupt, or is it extortion? Do I threaten you if you don't do something corrupt, right? That's the distinction between bribery or extortion. In this case, it's possible that both occurred. The president said, you know, I'm not going to give you a White House meeting, you know, or I will give you aid if you do this. And let me be clear. I'm not saying the president said that. That is, of course, the purpose of these hearings that we have out. But allegedly, the president did something that looks both like bribery and extortion. This is not about focus groups. This is about making abuse of power understandable to the American people.
And finally, I got 30 seconds. I want to ask you the same question I asked Steve Scalise. What do you think of the president's decision to clear those 3 members of the military who had been accused or convicted of war crimes?
Well, that's a great question, Chris. And you know what makes me saddest about this is that despite what Steve Scalise said, this is not a question of our soldiers being constrained by lawyers on the battlefield. You know, almost all of our soldiers on the battlefield, our sailors, our Marines, behaved in exemplary fashion, didn't break the law, did not shoot innocent people. A very small number of them did. And we are a good society because when our soldiers or military people do that sort of thing, we have a conscience. We seek justice, and that's what we have done. And, of course, the president has reversed that. And that sends a terrible signal to those good people in the military, not to mention our enemies who now say, look, the United States is no different. They have no moral backbone. They don't hold themselves accountable. This is an ugly moment in our history.
Congressman Huntz, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And, of course, we'll be watching you and all the other colleagues on the House Intelligence Committee in this week's round of hearings.
Talk to you soon.